Despite the evidence against David, he maintained a belief in his own intellectual superiority and presumed that he would be able to navigate the legal system without being found guilty. This story highlights the overconfidence and misplaced trust in intellect that David harbored, hinting at potential consequences for his actions. On 17th February 2019, David Wright and his friend Chris Phelps had a drug deal at a street corner at 3:48 a.m. Except this was no ordinary deal. It was a setup for a robbery on both sides. David demanded his buyers hand over their belongings, to which the women responded by pepper spraying Chris and running. Seconds later, David drove his revolver out of his waist and fired a single shot on Raul Quadro's chest, killing him instantly. David and Chris fled the scene and buried their revolver in a field and confidently left the scene, assuming they would not be caught in any way, but unfortunately they were almost immediately identified through multiple cameras around the area. David was brought in 2 days later, but still believed the cops would never find him guilty and that his extraordinary intellect would carry him through the case. The evidence against David, including eyewitnesses, identification, absence of an alibi, and recovered messages, strongly suggests his involvement in the crime. Meanwhile, David's defiant attitude and confidence in outplaying the detectives imply a tense and potentially challenging investigation ahead. Not only was David identified by multiple people through CCTV footage, but he also had no alibi, and Facebook messages were recovered discussing details of the alleged drug deal. David was there at a time of the murder, and the detective is just trying to uncover the details of exactly what happened and why, but David is having none of it and has a plan to outplay the detectives. The inability to recall the exact day of the event is an interesting aspect of David's defense. While it may be difficult to directly prove or disprove his claim, it does raise doubts about the credibility of his alibi. The lack of a specific date could be seen as an attempt to create ambiguity and evade accountability. David claims that Memphis had his phone at the drug deal, using it as an alibi. He also backs up his story by saying he doesn't remember exactly on which day the event occurred, something that can't directly be proven or disproven. However, for this to be true, the person with his phone would also have to dress exactly like David, have access to his Facebook account, and according to his own description of the perpetrator, change the color of his skin, which does not look too likely. Given substantial evidence against him, including eyewitnesses' accounts, CCTV footage, and recovered messages, it seems unlikely that David's denial will be effective in convincing investigators of his innocence. Instead, it may only serve to further undermine his credibility and complicate the legal proceedings. There's a lot of merit of staying silent in an interrogation like this. In fact, in most cases, it is usually the best course of action, coupled with asking for a lawyer as soon as possible. But here, David is outright denying any association with the case, even though he's directly linked to it through multiple sources. This response by David reveals a potential vulnerability. The detectives now have evidence that their tactics are effective in an unsettling way for unsettling David and eliciting a response from him. Armed with this knowledge, they can leverage the abundance of other evidence they possess to slowly build a case and potentially extract a full confession from him. Just because I met with somebody doesn't mean that I went with him to do something. This plain statement actually carries more weight to it than you might realize. The detective presented David with a piece of concrete evidence that puts his saying dead to rights, to which he responds by confirming that he had indeed met with Cody, but it went no further than that. Again, it seems like nothing, but now the detectives know this tactic works on David. They can attempt to use the wealth of other evidence they have to slowly extract a full confession from him. In response to this lack of progress, the detectives decided to take a different tactic. They shifted their focus to threatening David with the potential consequences of his actions on his friends. This change in strategy indicates a willingness to explore different angles and apply pressure from a different perspective. The interview went on for 40 minutes and almost no progress was made. Forcing him into a corner didn't seem to be working, and neither does running through the events of the night or even explaining why what he's doing is a bad idea for him. So instead, the detectives almost completely switch up and begin to threaten him with consequences of his own actions on his friends. David was caught lying when asked about where he was at 8 o'clock in the evening. The observation that David has been caught in the lie highlights a significant turning point in the interrogation. This revelation likely creates a sense of discomfort and unease for David, as his credibility is now compromised. It becomes evident that his primary concern throughout the video has been preserving his ego and maintaining a facade of innocence. Blatantly caught in a lie, it might not seem like it, but David is starting to get uncomfortable. If it's not been obvious throughout the whole video, the only thing he cares about is his own ego. So now that that has been damaged, he's immediately on the back foot, and it's up to the detectives to keep pushing and try to get him to move just a little bit further. The observation of David's physical movements, including adjusting his cap and slight hand movements, along with his stuttering speech, indicates a noticeable shift in his demeanor and increasing discomfort. These behaviors suggest that his ego has been bruised, likely due to the ongoing interrogation and the mounting pressure. For the first time in an hour he has sat in the interrogation room, David moves his hand from the lap and adjusts his cap. His hands have also been moving very slightly, and he's been stuttering over his words. His ego has been properly bruised, and, well, he's starting to get really uncomfortable. If provoked, narcissists such as David are likely to suddenly snap in an instinctive effort to prove that they are smart and under control, but often give up all the information the copy needs to catch them dead to rights. So the detective keeps up his non-nonsense, direct questions to try and get him to crack. In summary, David's decision to remain silent and his extensive criminal history ultimately contributed to a lengthy prison sentence. His lack of defense or cooperation likely influenced the court's judgment, resulting in a severe punishment. And so it seems the conversation truly was over from then on. David refused to get even another word, choosing not to exercise his perfect vernacular anymore, and predictably he did not last long in court, given that he made no attempt to defend himself or, well, to cooperate with the detectives. He was faced with the maximum possible sentence. David was also already a convicted felon of arson, burglary, vehicle theft, and 35 other misdemeanors dating all the way back to 1999. So in October of 2020, 33 years old, David Wright was sentenced to a 40-year prison sentence without the possibility of parole.